Jeremy here. In the previous video, I showed how a higher win probability at net doesn't necessarily mean a player should approach the net more often. More generally, you can get a deceptively high win probability for any offensive tactic or tactic players use when already up in the point. In this video, I'm going to show how the reverse can happen as well. Players will naturally have lower win probabilities for defensive tactics because they usually attempt those when down in the point. The most extreme example is the defensive lob. If you attempt a defensive lob, your win probability will usually be very low. You're essentially throwing the ball up in the hopes your opponent either misses the smash or gets tentative with it and lets you back in the point. However, that doesn't mean the defensive lob is a bad tactic given the situation. It's still better than giving your opponent an easy volley or trying a desperation passing shot you'll almost certainly miss. However, as much as I'd like to analyze defensive lobs, they're too rare for me to get an adequate sample size in just one match. So instead of defensive lobs, I look at ground strokes hit down the middle. Now, down the middle doesn't always equal defense. There are some instances in which players will attack down the middle. For instance, if this is my opponent and this is me, I might hit my approach shot down the middle to take away my opponent's angles. But often, you hit down the middle when you receive an aggressive ball, or if you get pulled off the court and have no choice but to hit down the middle. Aside from substituting hitting down the middle for approaching the net, the statistical setup in this video is the same as it was in the last one. Without including the control variables, I find that Murray and Raonic were 10 to 15% less likely to win the point when they hit down the middle. However, when I include the control variables, that is, short incoming ball, centered incoming ball, and defensive incoming ball, 10 to 15% less likely drops to 8 to 10% less likely. In other words, part of the lower win probabilities was due to the incoming ball, nothing to do with hitting down the middle. And there are other control variables that may matter too, such as how far back you're standing, which is not necessarily the same thing as how deep the incoming ball was. So the incoming ball can land not so deep, but I could still be standing way back here to return it. If I add additional control variables, they could theoretically eat further into that 8 to 10%, dropping it closer to 0%. In other words, despite a lower win probability when hitting down the middle, that doesn't mean Murray and Raonic should go out of their way to avoid hitting down the middle. I'd like to make one last point, that the quality of the incoming ball matters when looking at win probabilities seems to me more evident for hitting down the middle than for approaching the net. If I tell a player to hit down the middle less often because that player is winning less often when doing so, I may get a response like, I'm not trying to hit down the middle, but sometimes I have no choice. And that makes sense. Well, the same concept applies to approaches. Sometimes players are too hesitant to come to net and should approach more often. But other times they aren't trying to stay at the baseline, it's just that they have no choice. This, in essence, is why it's so important to understand causal relationships in the data before giving tactical advice.